So you don't want to see gold go up fast to $3,500.
Right.
You get your big dopamine hit. I'm rich, and then boom, they cut the knees out from underneath the market, and it's back to 2,700. And then I'm depressed because you bought 32, and now you're $500 underwater. Okay. And then you're going to be so demoralized that when it gets back to 32, you're going to sell right back into them, and they're going to be able to control the price band. So $250 up, $125 down is what you want to see in gold through 2025. And that could easily take gold to $4,000 to $4,500 an ounce. If it gets out of control, it's gonna pump and dump. It won't pump and dump as hard as silver will. And because silver is more thinly traded, more of an industrial metal, and more volatile.
Hey guys, my name is Danny. Welcome to Capital Cosm. Today's guest is Tom Luongo, who I'm stoked to have back on the show. Tom, thank you so much for making the trip.
Thanks,
virtually.
Sir. How are you?
Good. We just had a 20-minute talk, and it was like, let's just go ahead and hit record. Let's get some of this stuff on tape. Tom, what is occupying your headspace right now? What's top of mind for you?
Oh, wow. What's occupying my headspace right now is the fact that feels like there's a calm before the storm, which is obviously November 5th. It's so funny that this year's election is on Guy Fawkes Day, right? It's hilarious. And in the world that I live in, I'm like, in the headspace I live in, it's funny. And it's funny that I haven't written about it all year.
It's poetic.
I haven't done a poetic thing about it. I literally haven't had the time. But it's this kind of eerie calm. I was on with my friend Alex Craner and Sean Newman the other day. We did our monthly gig on Sean Newman's podcast, and Sean was coming in hoping that, thinking that everything was falling apart and there's all these horrible things, and he had this big long list. And then Alex and I came in and went, things look a little better than they should. Like we're seeing notes of the American military telling everybody to stand down, and that Ukraine we're in the face saving portion of this from the U.S.'s point of view, but then the people who've been trying to propel the U.S. into these conflicts are still trying to propel us into the conflict. And so it's all very unsettled. Now, what I mean by that, and of course, the people I'm talking about there are the Brits and the Israelis, which are basically the same people. So that's what I'm been most watching for is I've begun to start looking ahead past the election itself, and I'm looking at some of the things that are happening in and around that area. I was chatting with my partner at Gold Ghosts and Guns, Dexter White, last night, and there's some things happening in Turkey with the Kurds that are really interesting that we haven't really been able to parse yet, because it's like, oh, we need to put this in our hopper and think about it. Apparently, Erdogan just released from prison the head of the real Kurdish leadership, right? So the Kurds are treated in Turkish. Just to give you an idea of what's been going through my head. You asked, so I'll start there. In Turkey, politically, the Kurds are less than human, right? And, Sykes-Picot 110 years ago split the Kurds up across 4 different countries: Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, in order to be able for the British to be able to go in and throw some money at them and say, hey, why don't you start a rebellion and try and go for your own country? And then we always betray them at the last moment, because basically they're just being used as a geopolitical tool to reinforce certain other orthodoxies, like the British control of the maritime trade routes, or get a pipeline through this country over here, or whatever. And if the gambit fails, well, then you just, blame it on the Kurds, watch them get slaughtered and walk away. This is nothing new. The Brits have been doing this shit for 300 years. So Erdogan releasing the guy from prison, I don't remember his name, but it's a very significant situation, because he would be the leader of what would be the real Kurdish political leadership, not the Kurdish groups, radical groups that are backed by the CIA or MI6 or the Mossad or anybody else. And so, in a sense, what does that mean? Right. And we don't know, but we can speculate, and we can start to think about it in these terms, that maybe what Erdogan is doing here is he's sending a message to the West. He's like, look, we're done with this. We're going to bring the Kurds into Turkish politics in order to defend territorial Turkey, because clearly what our goal has been, and the kind of the blackmail across at that we've been throwing at Erdogan for years. The carrot and the stick thing is, hey, you can have EU membership, but if you don't give us what we want, then the stick is we're going to break Turkey up by activating the Kurds against you, which is so every time we play nice with the Kurds, is like how we've done by backing the SDF Kurds in Syria to steal all the oil wells east of the Euphrates River and keep an American presence there. That drives Erdogan crazy, and then he goes and invades the northern part of Syria and takes over part of the country and all the rest of that. So I mean, and I'm jumping around here, but that's part of what's happened over the last 10 years. Now think about that in the context of what we've been seeing, increased reports of Syrian forces and Iraqi militia forces attacking Kurdish American positions east of the Euphrates River at these oil establishments, right? And the Russians are turning a blind eye to it. In the past, the Russians have been saying, no, don't do that. That's bad. Like that's going to escalate things in a way that we can't control. Now the Russians are saying, no, go ahead and do that. Same way that the Russians are escalating their attacking their military position on the front in the eastern in the Donbass. They're now pushing much harder than they have in the past, right? Because they can feel that the Ukrainian army is finally starting to collapse. They've gotten word from the Americans that no more weapons are coming in. We're starting to see like the Germans say, hey, we need to have an end to this war, blah, 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 blah. We're starting to see the political costs of this war be so high that heads of state that were put in power to create this war are now backing off of it, which is exactly, I'll be honest with you, Danny, it was exactly what I wrote about 2.5 years ago when the war started. Right after, Putin pulled back from the initial shock and awe, didn't take Kiev. I said he's going to grind this out into a war of attrition because that's the best way to beat a superior opponent. Let him keep thinking that he has an opportunity to win, so that he'll keep committing more material and resources to it, and eventually he runs out, and then you run the.
Isn't that what they did in Syria?
This is exactly how the Russians fought World War II.
Isn't that what they also did in Syria?
It is. Well, somewhat. What they did in Syria was they walked in with just air forces to support the Syrian Arab army and advisors to get the Syrian Arab armies, rebuilt. And then they used every small victory in securing the area first around Damascus, and then, the Quercus Air Force, the Quercus Air Base, and then Aleppo and everything else, use that to harden the Syrian Arab army into an effective fighting force with Russian air cover. And according to Alex Craner, we did it again during that show the other day. Alex reminded me that the American Air Force and the military people on the ground in Syria knew where all the ISIS guys were. And they were being told by the political brass not to attack them, which was, if you go back to 2015 or 2014, 2015, I remember watching everybody saying, we can't defeat ISIS. We can't defeat ISIS. Like, we can read license plates from space, and we can't defeat a bunch of guys in Toyota pickup trucks with M50s running through the desert. Like, what are you talking about? These people work for you, who say they were Obama's creation. They were John McCain's creation. And I remember saying back then, you guys wouldn't know this because I was writing privately for Newsmax at the time when this was going on. So old issues of that newsletter, which is, now lost to the ages. But I remember arguing with my editors at Newsmax at the time, saying, this is what's going to happen. Putin's going to move in, and in 6 to 8 weeks, he's going to blow this whole thing wide open. Well, it turns out I didn't know this at the time when I wrote that, and I thought that. But Alex is telling me, oh, by the way, all that American intelligence about where ISIS was, we gave to the Russians, and then the Russians blew them apart. And then the Syrian army was able to go in and do it and take back most of the country. And eventually, then the strategy for the U.S. was to balkanize the country and, refuse to declare victory, leave and declare victory. And that's going to happen I think it's going to happen in the next 6 months, regardless of who wins the election. Because like Harris is going to be told to escalate this thing, but is she? Because who's backing Kamala Harris, right? Multiple times have I said identified that there is that Europe doesn't act with a singular voice. That City of London or the British, I like to call them the British remnant now, the remnant of the British Empire. They still have their tentacles everywhere. They still have political and economic influence in all of their former colonies, the United States, all across Europe, India, China, Hong Kong, everywhere. Even a lot of the stands. So that's one faction. Then there's what I call Davos, which is centered around Brussels and the European Union. They want different things. Now, they both want to destroy the United States, and they both want to beat and balkanize Russia. They both want to rule the world. But they have very different ideas about how that world will, that post-US, nation state order will come about. Like who's going to actually be running the show. Okay. Those are two different groups of people. And those are two different groups. Those are two different groups of people who have never liked each other.
Is King Charles part of Davos? Would you consider them part of that Davos cluster?
He is. He's a traitor. And so is Keir Starmer. And they were installed in the coup against the Lizzes in September of 2022. Right. So when you lay it out like that, then you realize, okay, well, if Kamala Harris works for Obama, who works for Davos, and absolutely he maps to Davos, then you realize that Israel, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, all of that. And then you look at Israeli politics and you mirror that to British politics. Since Brexit, you realize that they're a mirror image of each other. The political instability in both the UK and Israel are that's explanatory of that framework. It's actually Brexit and watching those talks that made me say, okay, there are two different factions at work here. And then when I started mapping it to Israeli politics, and I realized that Netanyahu who represents the old British remnant, and guys like Naftali Bennett and others, those are the only people I can remember from Netanyahu's opposition, Ehud Barak and those guys. They mapped to Davos, okay? Because what they want, when you go back to the JCPOA, when you go back to the Iran nuclear deal, what they want is easy access to Iranian oil on the cheap. And that's what the JCPOA was. It was a deal to secure the energy future of Europe and cut the Russians out. And it was a forking move against Russia through Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's what Syria was about. And so that's what they wanted. But the British then would have been kicked out of any influence in the region because those people would all now be they would have gotten what they wanted out of that situation, and they would have lost their influence in the entire region. Okay. They were not content with, just because they would have lost control of the Suez, they would have lost control of everything. The insurance company, the insurance business, and the shipping and Forex business, like runs through City of London, would move onto the continent, and they would be shut out. Right. So, that's why they had to get rid of Liz Truss when she put her mini budget forth, and that was we're opening up the North Slope and we're going to drill, because Britain couldn't be energy independent, and Britain was never going to be allowed to be an energy producer to sell back to the European Union. Okay, so that all maps to like one framework that makes sense. Now, this was all hypothetical on my part when I was putting these ideas together a couple of years ago, and then we just keep watching these things play themselves out, and be convinced by me or not, I don't really care. That's what the data keeps saying to me. So now where are we today? Well, if Kamala Harris wins, who's she going to work for? Davos or the British remnant? Is Trump versus Harris yet another redux of Britain versus continental Europe? And then the bigger question then is, who does Trump really work for? Does he work for the British remnant, or is he going to enable them to survive a bit while the Americans actually declare independence yet again? Is there a bigger game at play here? What does Trump actually represent? And from the way the British are acting, Trump plans on having the United States fully and finished declaring independence for the fourth freaking time from these people. The second time being the war between the states, or what we in the South like to call the recent unpleasantness. The third one would be when the third declaration of independence would be, I don't even, is our unwillingness to go into World War I, and then eventually Wilson betrays us there, and then the fourth one would be today. SOFR versus LIBOR, all the stuff that I talk about with SOFR and the debt indexing and the pricing of dollars, domestic dollars versus offshore dollars, blah, 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 blah. And then if you get, if that same group of people who now have monetary control over the United States get political control over the United States, then they have both ultimately lost their control. They'll still have influence, but they won't have control. Control is very important here. And so Harris's job is to support whatever it is that Brussels wants, or what Davos wants. And that is the destruction of the United States in every way. The British want that as well. They want to control whatever's left. And both of them are looking at the situation with Trump going, okay, he needs to die. He needs to be stopped. When you look at the team that he's built around him, that team is now 3 generations deep. J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Vivek, Elon Musk, and others, and then the shadow players behind the scenes, which is obviously Wall Street and the new digital Wall Street that's building up around the PayPal mafia, crypto, and everything else. And I think that's already done. I think those deals have already been cut. I think it's very clear that they've already been cut. And now Trump is like a great mob don, all puns intended, handing out favors to whoever is going to be, willing to, effectively bend the knee. But he's going to go in and he's going to bend the knee. He's going to make everybody bend the knee. And these people will not bend the knee. So then now they have to gin up World War III in order to, try and stop this from happening. So you ask what's consuming my head right now? It's that. And everything else is kind of secondary.
Yeah, just one more thing on Trump really quick.
Sure.
This time around, there doesn't appear to be any sense of urgency to stop him like there was in 16 and 20. And you did point out he does have new alliances this time around. Over half of Silicon Valley executives now support him, according to new data that's come out in the last couple of days. He also has the backing of Wall Street. You've seen that as well. My question to you is, does this help, or does this actually bog him down? Does this make him Trump without Trumpism, essentially?
I don't think so, man. What I think is that he's got a team around him now that knows, and people backing him that say, okay, we now have enough assets and enough power, real assets, to start dismantling this. In 2016, he had no one. And when you have no one, again, it's like everything else. Think of it this way. You have a bunch of weak second string players with some amount of power, but not a lot of power. The power is vested somewhere else. What do? Do you fight that? How do you come together to fight that? They've got you bound down regulatorily. They've got you bound down capital flow wise. They got you bound down at the legislature. They got you bound down with the Chevron deference and the 3-letter agencies running everything. You've got them. You don't have anything. You have no real assets. You have assets, but you don't have assets that you can bring to bear to this particular conflict that you're trying to, or this particular war you're trying to wage. You got plenty of other assets, and those assets are great. So while that's going on, what do most people do? What would you do? What would I do? Well, we'd lower our heads, we'd pay our taxes. We do, everybody does. We'll lower our heads, we'll pay our taxes, we'll complain, bitch, and whine and moan about it. But we know that ultimately the best we can do to stop the march of this is to give them as little of ourselves as we can. Is that kind of quiet quitting thing. It's that kind of John Galt argument, right? Now, John Galt was an asshole, and I have no sympathy for John Galt. And at some point in this conversation, I'm going to bring him back, and I'm going to tell you what my sequel to Atlas Shrugged looks like. the biggest doorstop of all time. The sequel is 1 page long, and I'll explain why in a second. But you have that quiet quitting thing going on, and everybody just kind of doing what they can to slow down and basically monkey wrench everything, simply because you've got an entire society now building up, oppositional behavior disorder within the society. It's fine. It's exactly how you do it. And then when the opportunity comes to make a big functional and structural change to the game board, you take it and you run with it. And then, so, as a good Austrian economist, and I look at it and I go, hey, clearly the thing to worry about, the thing to think about here is how has the money system changed, which is why when I saw SOFR and I understood the implications of it, and I understood what Powell started to try and do in 2021 by tightening without tightening, even though nobody wanted him to tighten. That was what COVID was about. It was about forcing the Fed back to the zero bound permanently. Because that was going to be the mechanism by which you bring in UBI, MMT, and all the rest of it, because you just do away with the central bank by turning it into yet another fucking Eurodollar bank. All right? At the zero bound, the Fed is not a central bank. I'm not the one who said that. Danielle Bedino Booth has said that 100 times, and she's completely fucking right about that. I know, Danielle, I shouldn't curse in public. It's bad form. I don't care. It's not my brand, honey. It's yours. And good on you for it. So, when you think of it that way, and then when you see that they put SOFR into place and they started the process. So under Trump, they got things done under Trump that were necessary. They got a couple of Supreme Court judges in that would eventually allow them to overturn Roe v. Wade and Chevron and rule properly on the Jarkissi case and how the SEC prosecuted George Jarkissi over what they called fraud, basically their administrative star chamber courts. All that's been dismantled. All that's been done away with. Now they have to repack the Supreme Court and rebuild it to get back legal control over that, so they can have legal imprimatur of why they're doing what they're doing. Right? It's that whole Emperor Palpatine thing about making things legal. So, when you have that kind of moment, you take it and then you build from that. And so Brexit and Trump really were important, but both symbolically, but also functionally, because then you get control of the monetary system. And then once that new system has been implemented fully, i.e. in 2022, when SOFR becomes the law of the land and new debt instruments must be quoted versus SOFR, not versus LIBOR in the United States. Once that happens, now we have a different world. Now the game board has changed. Now people can start acting differently. Now they don't have to put their heads down. Now they can tap Joe Manchin on the shoulder and say, don't vote for Build Back Better. They can tap Powell on the shoulder and say, don't bow to the pressure on this insider trading scandal. Yeah, we're going to have to probably give up a couple of people, but you're going to get a second term as Fed chair, and you're going to do X, Y, and then we can get this shit done. Yeah, and you start to see all those things happening. And then you see the changes in relations with Saudi Arabia and the United States. You see Turkey change their tone a little bit. You see this one change their tone a little bit. Yeah. And it's all in service of that, and all that centralized power that everybody said, well, we can't fight these people anymore. And that's the other lesson from Russia invading Syria in 2015. It was the first time. Well, it actually goes back to Iran standing up to Obama, and when they got cut out of SWIFT, and they survived. Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was terrible, but they survived.
And it made him self-reliant.
Yes, and they made and the Russians did the same thing. They de-dollarized their economy. They did what they had to do. They invited friends to come in and invest. Blah 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 blah. We all know the story now. But they also went into Syria, where the United States had, and the West and NATO had come in and said, we now own Syria, and the Russians said no, and told everybody, we have your in the Middle East, we have your back, and the U.S. and NATO backed down.
Yeah.
That gives spine to the spineless. That gives voice to the voiceless. The people aren't spine. They have every right to be spineless at that moment in time. They're just trying to survive.
Yep.
Like it's not that I say that way, not passing judgment on these people at all. I get it. That's what I do.
They're in a very tough position, and this is actually a perfect segue into BRICS, into this BRICS meeting over there in Kazan, Russia. Putin opened up the conference by saying that we did not want to go to war against the dollar, but you guys forced us to. You guys forced us to create a settlement currency, and so they did. They just premiered the new BRICS banknote. Tom, what do you make of this? What do you make of this development? Is it, and then also if you can kind of provide any insights on how the structure of this thing and how it's going to be released.
Okay, well, I'm gonna defer on to, because we don't know how they're gonna eventually. We have an idea. They've leaked a lot of stuff. Let's not go any further than that. Let's just talk about what Putin said. Let's talk about it in terms of pressure and imbalance and arbitrage.
Okay,
which creates the milieu for the formation of a cartel, right? I'm going to do the one that everybody understands because it's near and dear to their hearts because, well, we're all, but for the most part, we all are middle-class wage slaves. Most of us are not. I'm not anymore, thankfully, because my patrons are awesome. But, those of you who are wage slaves, let's look at Boeing's strike this week or the longshoreman strike or this one or that one, which are all, by the way, they're all just operations to try and derail the American economy and destroy the supply chains in the American economy, and to bind it down with even more onerous, and even more onerous and ridiculous labor environment. But let's just talk about why do labor unions form? They form because there's an imbalance and an arbitrage, and between the supply and the demand for labor, and how the capitalist class is effectively exploiting the workers, and they think that if they get together and they collectively bargain with and they all hold their hands up together and they stand, okay, fine, we can fight for better wages or some time off or some this or some that, fine. And that's fine. If it's a voluntary arrangement and the government's not giving the unions like guns, metaphorically and otherwise, all for it. That's what people do when they're under threat. When a situation becomes abusive and there's an arbitrage opportunity there, that's when a price fixing cartel can absolutely help clear a market and make that market better, right? By forcing the capitalists to see that they'll get more work out of their labor at slightly higher wages, and don't work them to death. Okay, whether that's a story, it's a real story, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's a story, right? But it's a natural, and it's explanatory of what actually happened. Not all of it, but the main thrust of it and what people take away from it. Pressure from the outside forces people into a defensive mode to stand together and go, you know what? Fuck you. No, I want $3 an hour, not $1.50, and I want Saturdays off. And you can't fire me for not wanting to work on Saturday. Fuck you. Okay. I can only work 5 days a week. I'm only working 60 hours. Or if you pay me, and if you work me more than 40, you got to pay me time and a half. Fine. Whatever. Pick your, but once that arbitrage has been closed, once that imbalance has been closed, the need for the union now needs to go away. You've fought the good fight. You've won a new contract. You've won some new rules. And you've taught the owner the valuable lesson: treat us this level more, this much better, and you'll get this much more work out of us. And then everybody goes, oh wow, that's a win-win. And then the union goes away. The businesses are better. Everybody makes more money. Everyone's fat and happy. He can afford the G.I. Joe for the Kung Fu Grip for kid for Christmas, and the capitalist gets to, light his cigars with $100 notes. Everybody wins. Goes away. What happens when the capitalists refuse? What happens when that external hand never stops pushing? You see a cartel continue to defend itself. That's why OPEC still exists. That's why it's not OPEC anymore. It's BROPEC plus, because we added Brazil and Russia to the damn thing. Right? Go look at BRICS. BRICS is basically BROPEC plus Southeast Asia and some other African nations. Like, we look at it, right?
Yep.
It's why OPEC kept adding countries over time, and why it was able to stay in power, because the powers that be wanted to control the oil markets, and they wanted to control the oil markets by breaking the cartel. The way you break the cartel is you stop giving the cartel a reason to exist. But they're control freaks, and control freaks don't back down. They double down because they're narcissists and they're control freaks and they're abusers, and their personality profile is what it is. And they say, fuck you, I'm making it legal and you're going to knuckle under, because they don't know anything else. They don't think they have to. Okay, fine. Well, BRICS is just another price fixing cartel. It's an evolution of BRICS, of OPEC. But now it's towards currency and the dollar. And I said from the moment that I thought I was writing under somebody else's name 12 years ago, right? I was ghostwriting for a guy. And I wrote all of this back then. I saw it then. I said, Obama is raising the cost of using dollars by doing this, and it's going to come back and bite us in the fucking ass. It's going to start the avalanche. It's a pebble, but it's going to grow into an avalanche. And when they finally realize that they've failed, they'll, that avalanche, and to quote Ambassador Kosh from Babylon 5, the avalanche has already started. It's too late for the pebbles to vote. And they don't realize that they've become the pebbles, because when you look at the BRICS, they control 40% of the world's GDP, roughly. They produce 40% of the world's population, and the potential productive capacity and total addressable market, and now you've pissed these people off. And once Iran survived, and then Syria survived because of the Russians, and then all the things I already talked about tonight, it's all leading to this moment. You guys created this fucking monster you've now let out of the bag, and then they're just going to walk away, and then you've lost that market, and you're going to have, a balkanized world. Trade will still be global, but trade settlement will be balkanized amongst different systems. SWIFT will no longer rule the world, and their grand plan to roll the whole world up into a digital CBDC administered by the UN and the IMF fails. And the whole fucking thing just collapses. And I got news for you. Everybody that Trump has surrounded himself with understands this. And so Wall Street saw this. That's why they implemented SOFR. They got it through. That's why they've been doing what they've been doing. That's why they told Powell to raise interest rates to 5.5% and bust fucking Europe upside one head and down the other, because they deserve it. Fuck these people. They're evil goddamn colonialist pedophiles. Fuck them. And they've been winning. And that's what we just need to see it. And once you see it that way, you're like, oh my God, of course it's this way. Like, we have all this power. Why aren't we using it? Why are we using it for evil as opposed to, not, I wouldn't say good, but it's certainly like better. Like, I'm not going to ascribe like noble motivations to Wall Street. I mean, God forbid. But survival? In the world of Davos, why in the fuck would you ever need another commercial bank? What purpose does JP Morgan's existence at that point is a threat to that?
Yep. Why a middleman? Why the intermediary with the commercial banks?
They look at JP Morgan as the bourgeois. How's that for? That's the first time I've ever thought of it that way. You use the word middleman. I'm like, oh yeah, they're the bourgeois. To Davos, they're the bourgeois. And what have they done for the last 15 years since they hijacked the Michael Brown riot talk, not riots, but marches, and they turned him into Occupy Wall Street. Tim Pool talks about all this all the time, that he was there. He watched these fucking people take the
mob
and turn it.
I remember it.
What's that?
Yeah, no, I remember. Occupy Wall Street was a hodgepodge of libertarians, anti-war leftists. It wasn't just a monolith. It was a collection of different groups together for a unified cause. And then after that, they transmuted it into cultural Marxism.
Yes. Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And that was done by George Soros and was done by the British because George Soros is a British agent. And if you don't believe me, go read Richard Poe. She's got Soros dead to rights, chapter and verse, and 150 citations. So, sorry, just want to throw something like, pesky things like fucking facts out there. Okay. So got a great article up on his Substack, how the British created George Soros and blamed it on the Jews. That's kind of his shtick now. It's great. You should read his book, by the way, how the British invented communism and blamed it on the Jews. That'll blow your mind as to what you think is actually going on. Okay. So when I sit down and I do I'm like, look, at the end of the day, it's not any one of these groups it's not like these groups don't have crossover, that when you look at all of them, that there's not, that the Venn diagrams are just, in the Venn diagram, they're all separate circles. They're not. There's some crossover in the middle. And guess what? They advertise how they over advertise and over amplify the effect of the other ones within the cabal to blame, they always are going to triangulate against one group. So, I hate to say it, but, the Zionists give everybody a good reason to hate them. And then you got to ask yourself, why do they do that? Maybe because they're working for a different cause than what you think they're working for. Just putting it out there. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying you at least have to consider it and then run the data, right? So, okay.
But Tom, how does the West, or like this is called the collective?
I'm talking
West,
in this specific instance, Davos, the British remnant, and the Jews and the Zionists in that Venn diagram. There's overlap between the three of them.
Yeah, but you just laid out like the BRICS plan for a new settlement currency and the rationale behind it. How does the West respond to it? And do you think
world war?
Nice and simple.
How do they respond to it? What Wall Street is clearly saying as they back Donald Trump, as the PayPal mafia and those guys, what they're saying is we balkanize. That the United States is breaking off. They want to survive. They want commercial banking to survive. The BRICS are saying the same thing. And eventually, Europe will run out of other people's money to prop up their failing capital markets. So this is why I watch the markets that I do for my patrons on a regular basis. And I keep adding color and nuance to that as I sharpen my spear and in the words of my first boss out of college, Mr. Luongo, let us sharpen our pencil and figure out and get better at figuring out how we can win this contract by how much can we sell these metals for we were doing metals analysis. I'm like, can we do them for $2 a piece? No, Tom, $3. Like, you know what I mean? But if we sharpen our pencil and we sharpen our understanding of this, we start looking for other things to help us create that mosaic of assets and how they move relative to each other to see, the dead hand of the British remnant, or to see the dead hand of Christine Lagarde, or to see Janet Yellen's, you know what I mean? And so once you understand who they are, because personnel is policy, so the players, who they map to, then you just watch them act, and they always act according to the way you've mapped them. If you've mapped them properly, if you mapped them wrong, you have to then you have to go back, rebuild the model, reiterate, and then see where you are. And yeah, I just and I don't know what happened that I was able to. I'll be honest with you. I don't know why I was able to do that as well as I did, but I have, I think. And if I didn't, we wouldn't be talking today because I would be irrelevant.
Hey guys, quick pause. As you know, we are big proponents of physical gold and silver on this channel. However, the conundrum often arises, where do you put it? Do you put it in an above ground safe where it becomes a target for burglars, intruders, etc.? Or do you bury it underground? This is where Dirty Man Safe comes in. This is a very simplified solution if you want to bury your gold or silver, or actually any valuables underground, whether it be alternative car keys, house keys, paperwork, legal documents, anything that's important to you. You can put in this bad boy right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at how it works. All right, so you're going to start off by digging a hole underground, sticking the tubular module in with the safe inside. You bury your valuables, and then whenever you want to extract it, boom, there it is. There's a string attachment. You just pull it out. Bada bing, bada boom. Check it out here. You have 3 different sizes: the girl safe, the man safe, and the old man safe, depending on how much you want to store in this thing. All about distribution. You want to diversify where you put your valuables. You don't want to just put them all in one place. And for more information, also click the link down below and get your 15% off discount. All right, guys, let's get back to the video.
Well, you're also a gamer, and that kind of like that's a unique qualifier to you versus everyone else in the space. You play board games, you're a strategist. That kind of mindset kind of elicits this type of thinking.
No, I know. And I realized a long time ago that when I started doing this, that I'm like, and I actually wrote an issue of my early Newsmax newsletter where I was talking about the evolution, as an intro, because when you write one of these things, you always take a metaphor for the first 500 words to set the tone. And I literally was talking about like the evolution of like card gaming and board gaming and whatnot as a means to understand how people have.
It's a microcosm.
Have better tools to model this outside of a particular idiom, and then use that as a means by which to go, this is why I do this analysis the way I do it, because I've been training myself for hundreds of hours while playing these games, which I really enjoy doing. And that's what that's the lessons they're teaching. And now I'm just applying it to this stuff. And again, I'm not like trying to toot my own horn here. I really am not. Like, I have experiences. Those experiences have led me to this type of thinking, as you pointed out. And I just try and apply it as best as possible, and then elicit people to, hey man, call me out on it if I'm missing something. And if I'm missing something and it's good, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, thank you. Or that's contradictory to what you thought something I thought I said. Great, I'll take it. And so you curate a group of people around you to funnel great information into you and to constantly challenge you, and then you stay in a kind of really, really you get to work at a very high level all the time without having to do unbelievable amounts of research, which just exhausts you.
Because research on its own, you've got to be able to. Just having a bunch of information isn't really useful unless you know what the signal is from the noise. I mean, that's tantamount to good data analysis. Just by having a big data set doesn't mean that it means shit. If you don't have a good analyst behind it, if you don't have someone that a statistician that can actually segment out the noise from the signal, then that data is worthless. Mm-hmm. And you see that with people who just they collect all this data and information, but there's really no insights. There's no signal.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Danny. And I remind everybody that I spent 25 years as a bench and research chemist doing, as a spectroscopist, as a, high energy spectroscopist, either atomic, either, UV vis, ultraviolet, the X-ray. I've done them all. Because of that, you have to understand your data quality. You have to understand what your limits of detection are. You have to understand the definitions of all these things and understand how to separate signal and noise. I didn't go to graduate school, though I did attempt to go to graduate school. And so I took some post-bac courses to prove to the department that I could handle a master's degree, because I graduated with a pretty pathetic GPA for somebody with my skill set. So I had to go post-bac for a couple of semesters in order to apply to graduate school. And then that first semester, in that one semester I went post-bac, I wound up dropping out anyway because it just wasn't the life for me. But I had to take an analytic chemistry course. And it was a graduate level analytic chemistry course with Dr. Weinfordner, the god of atomic fluorescence. And he's like, and we spent an entire first third of the class on signal to noise ratio. And I still have this book. The reason I'm bringing this up is I still have this book. And he's like, this is the very best textbook ever published on signal to noise. this edition, not the second edition, not the third edition, this one. It's out of print. We can't get it anymore. They stripped out and the whole first 2 chapters of the book are on signal to noise ratio, like statistical models of signal to noise. And he's like, without this, you don't have a framework with which to build an instrument to have an analytic to then build the instrument to collect the data you need to then get any conclusions. And I'm like, and so to this day, I haven't cracked the book in 30 years, but it's up on my bookshelf. And every once in a while I look up at it and I go, yeah. And it reminds me, it brings me right back to that class when I was 23, 24 years old, but 23, going, I remember those lectures and I remember that time and I remember that statement from him. And I'm like, yep. And then one of these days, I think I'm actually going to sit down. I need to really sit down and read that book again.
That's a hallmark of a good book. It's not whether or not you can 100% retain the information, is that you can, it reminds you of key points whenever you're reminded of the book. Because no one retains 100% information of a single book, especially as time goes on. You're going to forget the vast majority of it. It's all about retaining just the key points of that book and keeping them in the back of your mind. As a mental framework. But before we sign up, I want to get your thoughts on the recent gold rally, Tom. By my count, we've hit 35 all-time highs so far this year. Let's get your thoughts on gold.
Oh man, like it's all part of the same thing, right? One last point about just I will. But sure. I just want to pull back one last time and say, no, never mind. I lost what I was going to say. All right, so gold. Let's just go back. Gold looks great. Gold is silver looks interesting. I'm getting into trouble with a lot of people as much as I get into trouble with the Bitcoin maxis for not being a Bitcoin maxi. I'm getting in trouble with silver bugs because I refuse to call silver a monetary metal because it's not. It's an industrial metal and it trades like one. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a statement. It's a better analytic framework, by the way, if you treat silver as an industrial metal than a monetary one. You will make better trades with your silver. Trust me on this one. You will make a lot more money if you treat silver that way. That's the secret sauce for today's markets. But gold looks great here in the 2700s. It's doing what I want to call, it's like Bill Parcells' giant offense from the 1990s, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, 45 seconds, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, kick a field goal, send the well-rested defense out to, keep them off the field, and then you have them fresh for to run the prevent defense and bend don't break in the fourth quarter. That's what you want to see from gold. The powers that be, if you think of gold and silver and Bitcoin and all of the oppositional asset classes, economic theories, right? If you see yourself in that. If you align yourself in that space, headspace, you realize that, okay, they're going to fight all of these assets. Okay, fine. Nothing wrong with that. So but they control the markets. They control the capital flow. They control the order book. They control all of these things. And you can't fight them. But other central banks can fight them. Other finance ministers can fight them. Other sovereign wealth funds can fight them. Because they have the capital to do so, and you don't. So that's the first thing. Learn the humility. Your 5-ounce gold trade or your one contract on the COMEX, your bait, your chum. If you're not careful, they're going to steal your money from you. Last night, right on schedule for today, the COMEX raised the margin requirements on the silver contract in order to flush out some longs going into the weekend. Always happens when the minute silver starts embarrassing one of the major banks. You need to know it. You need to realize it. You need to deal with it. And you need to realize that you need to understand that silver is not a strong enough monetary asset to overcome that. Okay. Or it may overcome it. And if it does, well, that's really interesting. But you should expect it to not overcome that. Like no more than you would expect it in oil or aluminum or copper or anything else. But the silver market, being as structurally net short as it is, has more potential for shrugging that off. But at some point, they will just start raising the margin requirements, not 5%, not 10%, but 50%. And you will be stopped out and you will be crushed. And the price of silver will drop $4 in a day. I've watched it. I've seen it. Go back to the weekend they killed Osama bin Laden. And on Sunday night, they killed Osama bin Laden. COMEX raised the margin requirements before the market opened on Monday morning, and silver went from $49 in the overnight market to $38 by the time we got to the New York Open. And the silver bull market was over. It was done. They gave ground, they gave ground, they gave ground, they gave ground, and they sold puts into the top. Then they rigged the game against you. Then they made a scat of money, and then they used all the money that they made in that trade that they control to then reinforce the top all the way down. So in gold, I want to see the Bill Parcells 3 yards in a cloud of dust, because in that scenario, meaning $200 up, $100 down, $250 up, $125 down. Why do I want to see that? Because in that scenario, they can't make enough money to reload. They make money when the volatility gets crazy and they can control the volatility. So you don't want to see gold go up fast to $3,500.
Right.
You get your big dopamine hit. I'm rich. And then boom, they cut the knees out from underneath the market and it's back to 2,700. And then I'm depressed because you bought 32 and now you're $500 underwater. Okay. And then you're going to be so demoralized that when it gets back to 32, you're going to sell right back into them, and they're going to be able to control the price band. So $250 up, $125 down is what you want to see in gold through 2025. And that could easily take gold to $4,000 to $4,500 an ounce. If it gets out of control, it's going to pump and dump. It won't pump and dump as hard as silver will. And because silver is more thinly traded, more of an industrial metal, and more volatile. Just the way it is, folks. The silver contract doesn't even cost, what does it cost? 1/10, 1%, 100 ounce, or it's a 400 ounce silver contract. So it's like 4% of the value of a gold contract. Right. To play. Anybody can play in that fucking space. Right. So, once you understand how the market is structured, once you understand the game you're actually playing, then you can make good decisions about what do you think is actually happening. And so what I would suggest is, this is what you want to see. If you don't see that, if you start to see the market get away from itself, they're setting you up for a big fall. Don't chase the rally and wait for the pullback. That would be your strategy. Same thing. And, silver is just more of the same. But here's the thing that'll bake everybody's noodle. Why is gold rising? Martin Armstrong would say, and he's right about this, that it's a loss of confidence in the current financial architecture. I agree with Martin. It's also a weapon to be used by the BRICS to force the West into changing its fiscal and monetary policy. Now I have one for you. How does the Fed survive? Well, the Fed has 8,133.5 tons of gold on its balance sheet at $42.22 an ounce. Everybody knows this. The Fed's balance sheet, $11.04 billion worth of gold. No, it's not really. It's $700 billion worth of gold, or whatever 2,725 times that number is. I don't keep that number in my head. I really probably should. Before I hit record on these things, I should really have that number to talk about. It's a percentage of the gold of the Fed's balance sheet. How do you restore confidence in the fiscal position of the United States? You raise the gold reserves, the hard asset reserves of the Federal Reserve, to be a higher percentage of the balance sheet. So is the Fed really fighting the price of gold? Or are they just managing the rise along that the BRICS are also managing in order to not create a panic while also recapitalizing the United States and gently changing the ratio of shit assets?
It's got to be a slow burn.
Right. Yeah, it's got to be a slow burn. Yeah, it's the only thing that makes any sense. So, when you think of it that way, the Fed's not fighting the gold price anymore. That regime is, they're not. They may be fighting the silver price in order, because there are certain members of Wall Street that, are biblically net short silver and then ask yourself in 2024 why BofA or Citigroup or whoever is actually biblically net short silver. And it's not JP Morgan, folks. It's either BofA or Citigroup. We've seen enough crap come out through Bloomberg and Reuters and everything else. It's those two that are in the danger zone. And that's who's getting defended. But
And
then
this
ask
may
yourself,
this may or may not be
the
signal.
question: why did they do that? Why did they keep building? Who did that? Well, what if they're a time bomb? You blow up BOFA's fucking hedge book in silver, their order book in silver. You bankrupt BOFA, that and then forces the Fed to have to bail them out. It's a time bomb. Just like I argued about Archegos Capital, the Chinese, I said Archegos Capital was a time bomb. Evergrande was a time bomb.
What's the timing? What's the timing for a BOFA blowout potentially?
I don't know. It could be tomorrow. So I don't know. But what we're seeing is the COMEX defend itself, the LBMA defend itself. Or maybe they thought that this was going to be a time bomb that they were going to be able to use, and now things have gotten so out of whack that, or the game has moved so far against them that that's not even a winning strategy anymore. I don't know. I'm laying these things out there for you to consider. I don't know what the situation actually is, but what I'm saying is, what if the goal here is a time bomb within the U.S. capital markets to take the banks down? Oh, okay. Actually, if you want a good reason for why it would be after the election if Trump wins, what if Trump wins in a walk on November 5th? Like all the electoral shenanigans they've got set up in Georgia and Arizona are, don't come to fruition. And
it does appear like
he just wins by so friggin' much that they can't rig it, right?
It does appear like they're just going to let him win again. Like I mentioned before, there does not appear to be any sense of urgency to stop him.
Right. So if that's the case, you're right. So if that's the case, let's go with your observation, right? So if that's the case, then the fallback move would be for BOFA or Citigroup or whoever to continue to add to their silver short and suppress the short of silver and other markets, Brent crude, this one, that one, whatever. Pick them all.
And then give him the hot potato.
And then blow them up after he wins. Is it financial World War III? Yeah. I mean, I go back and I tell you to go back and read the article I wrote called Archegos Bikini Atolls. When Archegos Capital blew up, I likened it to, a test case for the nuclear bomb. When we tested the bomb at the Bikini Atoll and let everybody know that we had the bomb, right? And then how many others? And all I said was, "This is what it looks like to me." And what if the Chinese have created like 5 or 6 more of these to blow up whenever they want it, where there's trapped billions of dollars from prime dealers and prime brokers behind the Chinese closed capital account or semi-closed capital account that they can't get their money out, right? So that becomes another one of those tripwires. Like these things, you have to look at them this way. Like, are these companies? FTX was probably one of these. Like they're littered everywhere. Like, okay, let's. I know it's a little harder to think of it that way in financial terms, but let's just make it really. Let's bring it right down to this week. What's happened in the last couple of weeks? We put American troops on the ground in Israel. Everybody, all the anti-war types, all the libertarians, everybody, they all scream bloody murder. See, we're going in there to more empire, and they all bitch, whine, and moan. And yes, they're right on the surface to bitch and whine about that. But take that analysis one step further, because at the same time, the Russians put Russian troops as advisors on the ground in Iran, bringing new S-500s and S-400 missile defense systems and Russian troops to man them and everything else. Put them in Iran in harm's way. Well, what does that do? That creates a standoff. Israel and then somebody leaked Iran's battle plans. Israel attacks Iran. They kill Russians. The Russians turn around and go, "Fuck Israel." Boom. It's on, baby. Same way, the Americans put American troops in Israel, and if Iran attacks Israel, you killed Americans. We have a casus belli to go after Iran, take out the nuclear facilities and everything else. Or those two tripwire troops are what are keeping us from a further escalation. So if that's the case, then everybody showed their hand here a little bit, right? The Japanese let the markets know that the yen carry trade, we can blow it up at a moment's notice. Don't get too short the yen or we'll blow you up. August 5th, Black Monday. Archegos Capital blows up for no fucking reason. Oh, by the way, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, get your shit in order and get out of our fucking backyard. BOFA. Hey, the silver short squeeze is happening. Davos is threatening us with the silver short squeeze, which we have to respond to. Like, everybody's doing this. They're everywhere. And once you start mapping these things elementally as to what they could mean strategically as assets, the world looks a lot different than just the headlines. And they bamboozle us with bullshit when the truth of the matter is this is a fucking war.
Yeah, totally, Tom. I think we've covered pretty much everything I had lined up for you. We do have Substack members' questions here for you. We're going to segue into that really quick. It's just one question. And I think you've actually already answered this, but this is from Pooh Bear, and he wants to know, I would love to hear Tom's take on Trump-Netanyahu relations if Trump wins office. I know he is saying all the pro-Zionism rhetoric on the campaign trail, but will he follow through to the point of escalating a U.S. war involvement and support should he win the election?
Yeah, I haven't really answered this question. It's a good question. Thank you for the was it Pooh Bear?
Pooh Bear.
That's his name?
Pooh Bear.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a good question. I think Trump is committed he's committed to ending all these wars. Trump is also a guy who you don't watch what he says, you watch what he does. He's very good at saying things. I also think that he hates Netanyahu with the passion of 100 Suns.
I think so too.
So he's going to force Netanyahu to bend the knee. I don't know if Netanyahu will, but if Bibi wants to survive, he damn well better. Because did you see what Trump did yesterday?
What did he do?
Asked about
the Hunter Biden.
Hunter Biden, not taking it off the table. What did I say on a couple of podcasts about 3 weeks ago? I think Biden made a deal with Trump to survive. And he's now actively sabotaging Kamala Harris, which also means that, oh, by the way, Biden's still commander-in-chief of the military. So any attempted military coup and enforcement of martial law after the creation of casus belli for World War III fails if Biden's made a deal with Trump. And if Trump is willing to pardon Hunter Biden after his sentencing, because the Democrats have been using that to hold over Joe Biden's head to keep him in line, and Joe's gone off the reservation. The only reason Joe would go off the reservation is if he got a guarantee from somebody else. Who else could give him the guarantee that he needs? I would think it would be the incoming president. So, when you start mapping those guys as mob bosses, everything makes sense. So Trump, I think, goes into this knowing that it's time to end all of this nonsense. So, and whether he'll be allowed to do it or whether he'll be capable of doing it, it's an open question. But I don't think he likes Bibi Netanyahu at all. I think that Netanyahu and what's his name, Jared Kushner, and you'll notice that Ivanka is nowhere near the White House this time. She's not even on the campaign trail with him.
Yeah, but Kushner is.
Is he? Yeah.
One of his campaign staffers leaked that Kushner was behind setting up the personnel for the second Trump administration. Well,
we'll see. We'll see. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I hope I've mapped this right.
Yeah.
So we'll go with that as the answer. You got
all right. Well, no, that's about it. Anything else you want to talk about, Tom? I think we've gone for about an hour now. Anything you want to bring up that we didn't get to?
They were good, Danny. Thank you for the invite as always. And if you like what you heard, you know what to do. Do the thing. But
where can people find you, Tom?
Great. If you don't, great. I just take it. I put it out in the spirit that it was intended, which is figure it out. We're all just trying to figure it out.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't think there's anyone on this planet who really figured it out. Even like these elites that are like at these high levels, they can only make speculations and best guesses when it comes to the opposing side, because they don't have intel on the opposing side. They have intel on their own side. And even within their own side, there's subterfuge going on. There's factions fighting amongst each other. I think the entire thing is way too complex for anyone to say that they have a complete map of this.
Yeah, no, I, in that respect, Martin Armstrong's like, I agree with Martin. Like, this is far bigger than any one person can map. And, you know, I make the good old college try towards it, but I know I'm only seeing 1% of the whole thing. I mean, you know, 2% of the whole thing. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm under no illusion about what I'm actually doing here. So, you know, that's what part of the reason why sometimes you have to pull back to the 40,000 foot level to try and get as much information as you can, but there's so much other information.
Yeah, so, yeah. The best we could all hope for is a very compact, low resolution view of the surroundings, but it's still any mapping is going to be low resolution nonetheless at best.
And at the end of the day, there isn't one story happening here, folks. There's no grand unifying narrative, other than maybe pedophiles want to stay in power. If that's and even if that's not true, we should work to prevent that as much as possible. Period, because fuck pedophiles.
Totally. Yeah.
All right.
Well,
I think that's a good way to end.
That's a good way to end it. Fuck pedophiles. Tom, where can people find you?
As always, you can follow me on my blog over at goldghostsandguns.com, which has been languishing. I need to write for it. And the podcasts are the Gold Ghosts and Guns podcast are all cross posted over there as well. But TFL 1728 on Twitter or X, and Patreon/Gold Ghosts and Guns, where we do the thing twice a week for 2 to 3 times a week for the patrons, as well as the monthly newsletter. So that's the gig, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Tom, thank you so much for your time, and thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give us a like and subscribe to the channel if you're getting value out of this content. A little bit goes a long way, and if you would like to take your support up an ante, check out our Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com. Link is in the description box down below. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys.